Zoom hear me okay?
Yes.
Excellent. Let me try to open one file here and we should be about ready. All right, let me call out these names, and if you would just holler at me, I'll try to mark. And by the way, a number of you had made up the class or indicated that you had been present by email, and I will forward that information to the appropriate party. Okay, Rex and Charmaine Adamson. Okay, Teresa Aldridge. Salemu Alemasi. Kenva Barr. Amber Bernhardt. Mark Cabrera. Bob and Lana Creel. They just walked in the room here, so I will mark you guys. Michelle Flores. Zeke Flores. I believe I saw a note from you, Zeke. Audrey Grizzle. Veronica Juarez. Alex London. Annette Miner. Okay, I thought I had seen Annette, but I don't guess she's here right at this moment. Camille Morales.
Here.
Gotcha. Ed Mullins. Rhonda Newbolt.
I'm here.
Gotcha. Emmanuel Ogedengbe. Karen Sanders.
I'm here.
Thank you, Karen. B and Ruth Shelburne. In case you didn't know, they are related to me. Austin Tidwell. And Maria Trevino. Okay, is there anybody on Zoom whose name I did not call?
Connie Williams.
And Donna Carter.
Okay.
Annette Miner.
Sorry. Okay, Connie Williams, Donna Carter. And who else?
Annette Miner just joined. Sorry.
Howdy, Annette. How are you doing?
I'm well, thank you.
Good. And then
Reginald
Dave
Wyatt.
Langford, who I'm supposed to threaten with a large caliber weapon to get him properly registered. Okay, excellent. Anybody else?
Reginald Wyatt.
Yes, Reginald, good to have you.
Yep.
All righty. I'm going to turn on a microphone here so that folks in the room get the full benefit of me in stereo. God bless your hearts. All right. Got to open up my online Bible here. Make a couple of alterations. Get back to the book of Judges. We're going to be starting in chapter 1 tonight, and we should end up somewhere in 3, God willing. All right. Okay. I'm going to attempt to share a document on screen. Let me know if y'all can see this here in a moment. Okay, y'all see the outline of the book of Judges?
Yes, sir.
Excellent, good. Mentioned in our opening class 2 weeks ago that the book of Judges has a double introduction and it also has a double conclusion. So 2 introductions, then at the bottom, 2 conclusions, and in the middle, those two introductions and conclusions are wrapped around 6 major cycles of Judges. There are 12 judges total in the book. Naturally, everything in scripture comes in 12, right? But anyway, 6 major Judges cycles with a double introduction and a double conclusion. The first introduction, which is chapter 1 through chapter 2, verse 5, deals with Israel's military failure. The second introduction, starting in chapter 2 and verse 6, will deal with Israel's religious and moral failure. Okay, last time we started this journey of the actual text, and we entitled the lesson Cracks in the Concrete. You know, when you begin to see cracks in your concrete, it usually means that sooner rather than later, you're going to have to replace a sidewalk, right? Even worse is if you see cracks in the dam. If you're walking along a dam wall and you see cracks in it, you might want to run because that's a real bad sign. Well, cracks in the concrete are what we get in the first chapter of the book of Judges. All right, I'm going to see if I can. Sorry, guys, I'm a newbie when it comes to Zoom sharing. There we go. We have text. Last time we started this process. After the death of Joshua, the people of Israel inquired of the Lord, who shall go up first for us against the Canaanites to fight against them? And the Lord said, Judah shall go up. I have given the land into his hand. And so last time we looked at the first section of material, which involves the adventures of Judah as they tried to conquer the rest of the territory that still remained to be conquered for them. And they had a lot of success. They fought and conquered city after city, right up until they got to, let's see, right up till we got to verse 19. I'm going to have to move this over a bit more. Yeah. And the Lord was with Judah, and he took possession of the hill country, but he could not drive out the inhabitants of the plain because they had chariots of iron. I mentioned last time that this was ironic. Iron? Why ironic? Because God had promised them they would not have issues on the battlefield. He would be with them. He would send his angel before them. He would send hornets before them, and he would send terror before them. And no one would be able to stand against them. No one, evidently, except folks who had chariots of iron. And so we have a little tension in the story here. By the way, this whole first introduction is told from an external perspective. We don't have any information about what the people are feeling, what they're thinking, or even what God is thinking. We're just told the story the way an external historian would observe it. And the external historian would say they got through the hill country and they conquered everything. But when they got to the plain, they couldn't conquer those folks because they had superior military weaponry. This is the first crack in the concrete. The first, Houston, we have a problem. Verse 20 goes on to say, Hebron was given to Caleb, as Moses had said, and he drove out from it the 3 sons of Anak. Those were big people. They were the descendants of the giants. Okay, that is the section on Judah. Now we come in verse 21, chapter 1, verse 21, to the next tribe, the people of Benjamin. Do they have any successes? No. One verse, and it's a verse of failure. They did not drive out the Jebusites who lived in Jerusalem. Some of you may be thinking, well, I thought Jerusalem was in Judah. Well, actually, Jerusalem is a border city. It's right on the border between Judah's territory and Benjamin's territory. So it can go either way. The people of Benjamin did not succeed in conquering the Jebusites, that is, the people who lived in Jebus, which was another name for Jerusalem. So the Jebusites have lived with the people of Benjamin to this day. Verse 22, the house of Joseph. You say, I don't remember a tribe named Joseph. Sure you do. You probably know them as the Ephraimites and the Manassites. Ephraim and Manasseh were the 2 sons of Joseph, and so there were really 2 tribes of Joseph. The house of Joseph went up against Bethel, and the Lord was with them. That means they won, right? The Lord was with them, and the house of Joseph scouted out Bethel. Now, the name of the city was formerly Luz. And the spies, now wait a minute, have you heard this story before? The Israelites scouting out a city by sending in spies and getting a report? Where have we heard that before? Wasn't that how they started the whole conquest of the land? Moses sent out 12 spies, and they went in. They said the land is, it's wonderful. It's exceedingly good, just like we were told. The only problem is the people who live there don't want to share. So they spied out the city. Verse 24 says, the spies saw a man coming out of the city, and they said to him, please show us the way into the city, and we will deal kindly with you. And he showed them the way into the city. And they struck the city with the edge of the sword, but they let the man and all his family go. Now, this should be pretty familiar to you guys as well, if you are familiar with the story of Joshua. The spies who went into Jericho were 2 spies. There, they took rooms at an inn run by an innkeeper or perhaps a prostitute, depending on how you render the word in the Hebrew. Maybe she was both, after all. They're both in the hospitality business. And she told them, I know that your God is going to give you victory. We all know that you're going to wipe the floor with us. So basically, I'm changing sides. I will hide you. I will protect you. I will not report you to the king. And in return, I ask that you spare my family. And they said to her, our skin for yours. If you are faithful in your dealing with us, then when we take the city, we will deal faithfully with you and your family. That woman's name was Rahab, and she became famous because she basically was assimilated into the Israelite nation, and she even found her way into the family tree of Jesus Christ. Pretty impressive. So this feels like a repeat of that story, right? Here's a story. Here's a town that needs to be conquered. They choose a man. They say, if you will show us the way that we can successfully get into the city, then we will deal faithfully with you. The only problem was this man had not said, I know that Yahweh is the true God, and he's going to win the battle, and I'm going to be faithful to him. None of that. They just say, we'll do a deal with you. He says, sure. He shows them how to get in. They conquered the city, but they let the man and his family go. They were faithful to their word. Verse 26, and the man went to the land of the Hittites, and he built the city and called its name Luz. That is its name to this day. In other words, the Israelites, the house of Joseph, did not destroy the city of Luz. They merely transplanted it. They left one guy alive when they were told to do what? kill them all. And that man and his family went to another place and they rebuilt the city. So instead of destroying the city of Luz, they merely changed its location, which is not exactly what the Lord said to do. The old commercial said there's Hertz Rent-A-Car and there's not exactly. They settled for not exactly. Verse 27, now that we're through with that part, Manasseh, the other part of the tribe of Joseph, did not drive out the inhabitants of Beth-shean and its villages, or Taanach and its villages, or the inhabitants of Dor and its villages, or the inhabitants of Ibleam and its villages, or the inhabitants of Megiddo and its villages, for the Canaanites persisted in dwelling in that land. Manasseh did a whole lot of not. They didn't do real well. And so they wound up living in the midst of the Canaanites. Now, verse 28 does say that when Israel grew strong, they put the Canaanites to forced labor, but they did not drive them out completely. Verse 29, and Ephraim, the other half of the Joseph tribes, did not drive out the Canaanites who lived in Gezer. So the Canaanites lived in Gezer among them. You see, Judah had a lot of success. Simeon had a lot of success. But the further you go down the list of tribes, the worse their performance, the less success they have in fulfilling the command to finish the task. Verse 30, Zebulun did not drive out the inhabitants of Kitron or the inhabitants of Nahalal, so the Canaanites lived among them, but became subject to forced labor. Verse 31, Asher did not drive out the inhabitants of Akko, or of Sidon, or of Alab, or of Akzib, or of Helba, or Athik, or Rehob. Guys, if you build a town, don't choose these names. Not fair to the people who have to live there. So verse 32, the Asherites lived among the Canaanites, the inhabitants of the land, for they did not drive them out. Verse 33, Naphtali did not drive out the inhabitants of Beth Shemesh or the inhabitants of Beth Anath. So they lived among the Canaanites, the inhabitants of the land. Nevertheless, the inhabitants of these two places became subject to forced labor for them. The worst of all comes with the tribe of Dan in verse 34. The people of Dan didn't conquer anything. They didn't drive out anyone. In fact, they were driven out. The Amorites pressed them back into the hill country, for they did not allow them to come down to the plain. The Danites didn't even get to go into their inheritance because the Amorites were too fierce for them. So verse 35, the Amorites persisted in dwelling in Mount Heres and Aijalon and Shaalbim, but the hand of the house of Joseph rested heavily on them, and they became subject to forced labor. Basically, what he's saying here is the tribe of Dan could not take their territory, but later the tribes of Joseph kind of began to horn in on it because they were a numerous people and they were strong, and they began to prevail against the Amorites and actually took some of the land that should have been the territory of Dan. All right, cracks in the concrete, folks. I didn't tell you this when we started, but if you had a map in front of you of the tribes and their territorial allotments, imagine a section of land from north to south, or rather from south to north. If you live, I know most of you are on Zoom, but those of you who live here, if you imagine here in Texas, if you imagine Midland and Odessa in the south, and then Lubbock in the middle, and Amarillo in the north. This is the south to north plan of all these tribes he's just mentioned. We started with Judah, right? Judah was in the far south, and Simeon was in the far south. Then you get to Benjamin, which is the next tribe, and then you get to Ephraim and Manasseh, and so forth and so on. He's literally going, and I don't know if the ancient map makers did maps the way we do, Rand McNally style. South is down here and north is up there. I don't know if that's the way they did maps. But interestingly, this list goes from south to north, and it leaves out the tribes on the other side of the Jordan because they already had their territory and they had already killed all the Canaanites or the Amorites that lived in them. So you don't hear anything about Gad. You don't hear anything about the other half of Manasseh or of Reuben. But all the other tribes here are listed from the far south to the far north. So the order is ascending, but the order of the moral and military victory is descending. So geographically, we're going up. The fortunes of the people through the story are coming down. So you have this ironic reversal that is going on in the chapter. In fact, one very savvy commentator said that you can really see 4 different stages of decline in the list that starts with Judah and ends with Dan and the Amorites. In the first section, which is verses 2 through 20, you have mostly military success. Judah takes town after town after town. Simeon does the same thing. Only in one case did Judah fail, and that's when they got down to the plain and they ran into the chariots of iron. So for the most part, Judah did drive out, until in one case they did not drive out. In Judah, there were no Canaanites living among them, none, which is what God had commanded. You stay separate from these people. It says the Kenites were living among them, but the Kenites were the relatives of Moses through marriage, and they had already been more or less assimilated as part of Judah. Then, stage 2 is found in verses 20 through 30. In this section, we mostly hear that they did not drive out the Canaanites. And so the Canaanites lived among them, but in many cases, the Canaanites were then pressed into forced labor as their servants, their water carriers, their woodcutters, their slaves. But this really gives the lie to the fact that they were not that obedient, because if you were strong enough to force people into your service, you're certainly strong enough to kill them. You've just gotten used to living with them. So you're really not doing what you were told to do. So in stage 2 of the decline, you're not successful in completely defeating them. They're living among you, but you're in charge. You're in the ascendancy. You're the ruling class. Verses 31 through 33 show us the third stage. Here again, they did not drive out the people, but instead of it saying that the Canaanites lived among them, in this stage, it says they lived among the Canaanites. It's a reversal in who lives among whom, meaning the Canaanites are in the ascendancy, and they're the ones who have to have permission. And then the fourth stage is verses 34 and 35, where in the case of Dan, they couldn't even get a lick of their territory. They were simply denied by the Amorites. So they were told to conquer and to kill. They ended up coexisting is what they ended up doing. So we went from conquest to coexistence, contrary to the will of God. All right, let's move on to chapter 2 because we have somewhat to cover tonight. Now the angel of the Lord went up from Gilgal to Bochum, and he said, what do they look like? When an angel appears to a whole nation or to an assembly of Israelites, I would love for us to have had some description here, but guess what? We don't get any. But evidently he was recognizable. He said, I brought you up from Egypt. I brought you into the land that I swore to give to your fathers. And I said, I will never break my covenant with you. And you shall make no covenant with the inhabitants of this land. You shall break down their altars, but you have not obeyed my voice. What is this you have done? The angel calls them out. I gave you a command, and you settled for noncompliance and disobedience. By the way, this statement, what is this you have done, echoes the very words of the Lord God that he spoke to Eve in Genesis chapter 3. What is this you have done? When parents look at their kids and kind of scream, what did you do? It ain't good. This is not a good setting. What is this you have done? So now I say, I will not drive them out before you, but they will become thorns in your sides, and their God shall be a snare to you. So the angel basically says, because you did not, you will not. Because you did not drive them out, you will not drive them out. You could have before if you had simply trusted me, but now you will literally not be able. That's your punishment. And all the land and all the wealth that could have been yours, you're going to have to share. Verse 4. As soon as the angel of the Lord spoke these words to all the people of Israel, the people lifted up their voices and wept. And they called the name of that place Bochim, which means weeping. The Trail of Tears, I think we would call it in Native American history. Now, folks, this is the end of the first introduction. It ends with tears. It ends with weeping. Curiously, when we get to the end of the final conclusion, we will have a repeat of this very thing. And they wept bitterly, is what it says in chapter 21. So the introduction starts with tears, and the whole sad story ends with bitter tears. One commentator said the author of the book of Judges is presenting this history as a story of weeping, as a story that will make you want to cry. Now we begin the second introduction. Notice in chapter 2 and verse 6, he says, when Joshua dismissed the people. Joshua already died, right? Yeah, he died in the first introduction. But now we're retreading the same time period from a different perspective. Remember that in the first introduction, it was about their military failure. In this introduction, we're going to be focusing upon the moral and religious failure of the people. And this is what Paul Harvey used to call the rest of the story. How come they couldn't defeat those guys with iron chariots? How come it didn't go as well as it was supposed to? Now we're going to learn why. We're going to learn, well, let me put it this way. I was walking around an apartment complex back in the days when I prayer walked a lot, and I was praying this apartment complex. And I'm walking along and I look down and there is a dead squirrel splayed out on the grass of the lawn. And squirrels are pretty cute animals. And when they're freshly dead, they're still cute. You know, he still has beautiful fur. He didn't even look injured. He just looked dead, but he was beautiful. And I walked over and looked at that squirrel, and I took a stick or something and I kind of flipped him. And underneath he was full of maggots. The seamy underbelly was ugly. It was a terrible sight. He looked real pretty until I turned him over. Well, the seamy underbelly is about to be exposed in the second introduction. Verse 6, when Joshua dismissed the people of Israel went each to his inheritance to take possession of the land. That's what they went to do. Didn't do so good now, did they? Verse 7, and the people served the Lord all the days of Joshua and all the days of the elders who outlived Joshua, who had seen all the great work the Lord had done for Israel. And Joshua, the son of Nun, the servant of the Lord, died at the age of 110 years. Do you know there are actually people in the United States now who are older than that? Not many, a few. And they buried him within the boundaries of his inheritance in Timnath-Heres in the hill country of Ephraim, north of the mountain of Gaash. And all that generation also were gathered to their fathers, and there arose another generation after them who did not know Yahweh or the work he had done for Israel. Where are the history teachers? Ed here was a school principal for how long?
Too long.
Too long. So there are 3 time generations here. There's the time of Joshua, during which the Lord did mighty works. Then there was the time of the elders who outlived Joshua, where they remembered the time that God did mighty works. And then there was the time after they all died, where nobody remembered. It's a sad day when you get to step 3. Verse 11. And the people of Israel did what was evil in the sight of the Lord and served the Baals. I'm going to do a little search on here. I'm going to try to do this on my screen so that you guys on Zoom can see it. I'm going to enter site and actually, let me enter the word evil and the word site. I'm using the English Standard Version. Obviously, if you're using a different version, the wording may not be identical. When I enter those 2 words and we go to the book of Judges, you will see that these 2 words appear 7 times in the book of Judges. This will be significant. If you had a final, and you may, I have no idea yet. I haven't talked to Kirk. For those
Hey,
of you that
David?
take credit. Yes.
Sorry to interrupt you. If you're trying to share that with Zoom, I don't know if anyone else can see it, but I can see it. I still see the outline of the book of
One.
Judges.
That hasn't been on.
Okay, I know what I did wrong. Thank you for telling me that.
I'm sorry.
No, you're good. You're good. Okay, I am screen sharing. What I need to do. Did it come up yet?
No, sir. When you mentioned test, I got nervous, so I want to make sure I get everything I need to.
Don't worry, they're not likely to be a test. Okay, why is that not? Okay, let me stop sharing and I'll try starting the sharing again and see if it will come up.
Okay.
Okay, share screen.
Yes.
I've also got a problem. Oh, okay. I never plugged that in.
I wonder what. we're doing. It would make it. At least for that's.
I do have a new brain on back order, but it's stuck in Tokyo. All right, can you guys on Zoom?
Yes. Evil in sight? Yes.
Well, what I need, Dave, is the control over there. It needs to be on side HDMI is the input that it needs to be on. I'm going to go ahead. You guys in class, you should have been on Zoom. What can I say? All right. 7 times in the book of Judges, you will find this very same statement made. That should indicate to you that it is what we call significant. You see what this says, side HDMI or something side? On input, HDMI side, that's the one. Ta-da! All right. Judges chapter 2, verse 11, which is where we are, says, and the people of Israel did what was evil in the sight of the Lord and served the Baals. In chapter 3 and verse 7, you're going to find a statement that should be vaguely familiar. And the people of Israel did what was evil in the sight of the Lord. In Judges 3 and verse 12, you're going to get it twice. Guy likes repetition. The people of Israel again did what was evil in the sight of the Lord. And he strengthened Eglon, the king of Moab, because what? They had done the very same thing. What was evil in the sight of the Lord. So that makes 4 times in 3 instances already. Chapter 4 and verse 1. And the people of Israel again did what was evil in the sight of the Lord. Okay. Chapter 6 and verse 1. The people of Israel did what was evil in the sight of the Lord. Chapter 10 and verse 6. The people of Israel again did what was evil in the sight of the Lord. I would say by this time they were very, very good at it. And chapter 13 of verse 1, again, the people did what was evil in the sight of the Lord. This is going to be very, very significant as we progress. One of the favorite techniques of the Hebrew art of storytelling is word repetition and the use of key words, and sometimes subtle plays on words in different contexts, in different ways. It is also key, I think, to the central message that the writer is trying to promote, and that is that we are to align our perspective with that of somebody named Yahweh. We assess life and everything in life from the perspective of the Lord. By the way, when you get out of the book of Judges into 1st and 2nd Samuel, and then 1st and 2nd Kings, you will find that after there are judges, there are monarchs, there are kings in Israel. And in virtually every case, the king's reign, or the summary of the king's reign, begins with what statement? That he either did what was righteous or what was evil in the sight of the Lord. You will find this statement going through the entire monarchic history. This is the regular refrain, and that should clue us to the fact that it might be significant. I would love it if somebody could put on my tombstone, and he did not do what was evil in the sight of the Lord. Okay. By the way, you folks on Zoom, do not be afraid to interrupt me. I'll slap you down if I feel like it, but it won't hurt, I promise. Okay. Now, if I can get this back to the text, there we go. You will notice in what follows that he's going to give us the cyclical pattern that will essentially cover the entire rest of the book. In what follows, there are no names, there are no dates, and there are no places. He's simply saying, let me tell you the way this is going to look. This is a cycle. They're going to go round and round and round and round and round. I remember being on a rafting river. What is the name of that river in, is it New Braunfels?
Yeah.
There's a little river where you can go rafting, and you go down this chute over this fall, and if you're not careful, you wind up in a whirlpool in the back, and you get stuck. Well, the Israelites got stuck, and they went round and round and round. And this is what the cycle looks like, starts in verse 11. The people of Israel did what was evil in the sight of the Lord, and they served the Baals. The Baals is a fairly general term for deities, the Canaanite gods. There were quite a few of them. I don't think they had as many as the Hindus, but they did have several. And verse 12, they abandoned the Lord, the God of their fathers, who had brought them out of the land of Egypt. They went after other gods from among the gods of the peoples who were around them and bowed down to them. And they provoked the Lord to anger. Here are three statements. You'll see them over and over in various ways. Number one, they did what was evil. That's kind of the overall summary. How did they do evil? By worshiping other gods. Over and over in the books of Exodus, Leviticus, and Deuteronomy, God says, as if to his spouse, there is one thing I will not tolerate. One thing I will not put up with. You having other lovers. You shall have no other gods before me. Did you ever understand that in the context of Valentine's? That's a statement of a lover. You shall have no other gods. And the result of their having other gods was that they provoked their God to anger. I have wondered to myself in the Old Testament. Let me ask this about the New Testament. In the New Testament, you take the love of God and the wrath of God, and what would you say the proportion is of the one to the other? How many times the love of God is mentioned versus the wrath? I haven't looked this up. I'm just, what do you think? 100 to 1, Dave says. Anybody on Zoom? You want to take a guess?
Would it be equal?
Would it be equal? There's an interesting question. I do think in the New Testament, the love of God is mentioned quite a bit more. I thought maybe 3 to 1, maybe more. David might be right. It could be 100 to 1. Who knows? But in the Old Testament, In the Old Testament, references to God's anger and wrath significantly outnumber references to his love or compassion. Oddly enough, and that's probably because the people of Israel didn't do what was right very often. And it's a story, right? So God spent a lot of the time in a serious state of mad. Verse 13, they abandoned the Lord. I think this must be one of the most painful verses in scripture for God. It's not just that they were window shopping. It's not just they had a crush on somebody else, but they abandoned God. And they served the Baals and the Ashtaroth. The Baals, this could be a general term for just the whole pantheon of gods, but the Baal specifically was the storm god of the Canaanite pantheon. And as the storm god, he was part of the fertility cult because, after all, the storms and the rain are necessary for the crops to grow, right? And the Ashtaroth, this was Astarte, or Astarte as she is sometimes known. She was Baal's consort. She was the storm god's wife or consort. So you have the male and the female who are involved in the fertility cult. Verse 14, so the anger, what did I say, of the Lord was kindled against Israel, and he gave them over to plunderers who plundered them. And he sold them into the hand of their surrounding enemies, so that they could no longer withstand their enemies. So they do evil, they abandon God, it says it twice. They go after other gods, and God gets angry. Then they start serving, having relations with other deity lovers, and God's anger is kindled, and it says he gave them over and he sold them. It's two different images for the same idea. God said, get out, enough with you. Just be gone. So verse 15, whenever they marched out, the hand of the Lord was against them for harm, as the Lord had warned. And as the Lord had sworn to them, and they were in terrible distress. Things got really, really bad. By the way, this term for harm that in verse 15, the hand of the Lord was against them for harm, is in the Hebrew, it's ra'ah. The term for evil is ra with oo, and then ra'ah is the evil that you experience as a result of the evil you did. So if you do ra, you get ra'ah. So it's a play on words. If you do evil, evil will come to you. Calamity will be the result, and not calamity chain. Sorry, I don't know where that came from. So this is the pattern, but the pattern is not finished. When they are in distress, what happens? Verse 16, then the Lord raised up judges who saved them out of the hands of those who plundered them. Yet they did not listen to their judges, but they whored after other gods and bowed down to them. All right, let's be blunt, because scripture is blunt here. He did not say they stepped out and committed adultery. It says they played the prostitute. What's the difference? You can commit adultery one time or for a season, and then you come to your senses and you tearfully repent and you seek to restore your relationship, and you have this glorious reunion and you live happily ever after. But not with a prostitute. She doesn't step out once or twice. She spends every Friday night in drag. This is habitual. This is ongoing. This is a lifestyle. He does not say Israel committed adultery. He says she was a hoe. She was a whore. That's what it says. And this expresses God's point of view. And they bowed down to them. They soon turned aside from the way in which their fathers had walked. Remember the generation that said that they served the Lord all the days of Joshua. Their fathers, under Joshua's tutelage and influence, have been faithful. But they did not do so. Verse 18, whenever the Lord raised up judges for them, the Lord was with the judge, and he saved them from the hand of their enemies all the days of the judge. For the Lord was moved to pity by their groaning because of those who afflicted and oppressed them. But whenever the judge died, they turned back and were what? Even more corrupt. So this is not just a cycle. This is actually a spiral that is moving down. These folks are circling the drain. They're not just going round and round. They're going round and round in a descending orbit. They're getting into lower and lower levels of degradation. And believe me, by the time we finish the book of Judges, you'll understand that. You'll see it. Won't be any doubt. They crashed and burned, quite literally. So here's the emotional pattern from God's point of view. He has betrothed a bride. He has married her at Sinai. Now she has stepped out and been unfaithful. The first time she was unfaithful, he sent his angel, and his angel at Bochum said, "How dare you?" And they wept, and it looked like they repented, and they had this tearful, sweet reconciliation and joy. Unfortunately, she then did what? She turned around and stepped out again. And again. And again. And finally, he had enough. He said, "Just go." So she went, and she got in trouble, and her life became a living hell. And when her life became a living hell, his heart was moved with compassion for her. It doesn't say she repented. It simply says he saw her distress and he was moved with compassion, and so he rescued her. He rescued her. But after she'd been rescued, she stooped to even lower acts of disobedience and disloyalty than she had before. So after his compassion, what happens? Verse 20. Now he is angrier than ever. So you have anger, compassion, fury. Because what happens when somebody betrays you and then comes back and says, "I'm sorry," and you forgive them, and they betray you again, and they come back and say, "I'm sorry," and you forgive them? There comes a day, doesn't there? There comes a day that is a point of no return. There comes a day when you're not going to fall for that anymore. There comes a day when you're done. And he said, "Because this people have transgressed my covenant and have not obeyed my voice, I'm just not going to do for them anymore." And what he was not going to do, verse 21, he said, "I will not drive out any of the nations. In fact, I'm going to let them hang around those nations. I'm going to test them with their lovers. I'm going to see whether there is any hope that she will be faithful again." So, verse 23, the Lord left those nations, not driving them out quickly, and he did not give them into the hand of Joshua. That's the cycle, and we're going to see it played out ad nauseum. So to conclude this second conclusion, in chapter 3 says, "So these are the nations that the Lord left to test Israel by them." That is, all the people in Israel who had not experienced the earlier wars in Canaan. It was only in order that the generations of the people of Israel might know war, to teach it to those who had not known it before. If they're going to punish them, we might as well put the punishment to use. We will at least train a new military generation in the process. That's what he's basically saying. So these are the nations: the Philistines, all the remaining Canaanites, the Sidonians, the Hivites, and so forth and so on. They were for the testing of Israel, to know whether Israel would obey the commandments of the Lord. Verses 5 and 6 are the summary of this second introduction, and it's not a good summary. So the people of Israel lived among. Remember these two statements from chapter 1, drive out and live among? We heard those verbs over and over and over again, didn't we? If they didn't drive them out, they ended up living among them. If they had driven them out, they would not have had to live among them. So living among is a symbol of their failure. They lived among the Canaanites, the Hittites, the Amorites, the Perizzites, the Hivites, and the Jebusites. And their daughters they took to themselves for wives, and their own daughters they gave to their sons, and they served their gods. You really can't kill them when they're in-laws, can you? Man, that complicates the whole thing. Except for the mother-in-law, but that's another story. Sorry. I did evil in the sight of the Lord. All right, we're going to take a 5-minute restroom break, and we will come back and encounter the first deliverer, the first judge cycle. See you back at about 6:25.
That's interesting. We're doing the yearly Bible reading. Old Testament read, and today in Exodus, we read where God told him to drive these people out, the Jebusites, the Hittites, and all of them. Says, don't marry, intermarry with them. Let your sons take their daughters or your daughters. And you're doing it.
You know, it was fascinating because Balaam, for all the evil that he was a very smart guy. He's hired to curse the Israelites, and God won't let him curse them. So he comes up with a backdoor strategy to get God to curse them. And it was precisely to parade the Moabite girls in front of the young Israelite men and to do exactly that.
But Balaam had a smart helper.
Yeah.
Which always reminded me of
Yes.
Enny Rhodes' famous story. He used to talk about Daniel defeating the Philistines with the jawbone of an ass, being a good King James preacher. And he says, and God's been basically using that same tool ever since.
Ever since. I had endless rounds of mirth with my son in the Bible stories, telling the story of Balaam out of the King James, when Balaam's ass says to him, "Why do you beat me so?"
Okay. Will Jackson said to give you greetings. I've been with him since
Have you?
1 o'clock this afternoon, going to various medical things. That's the reason I was late. You go to a doctor nowadays, he doesn't do it all. He does part and then sends you all over the place for blood and for x-rays and this kind of stuff. And that's what this was with him.
If you're out of this 2 inches of colon, that's not my specialty.
That's a couple that we've known together, and they don't have a car. And they live way over in East Lubbock now. I don't know if you knew that or not.
No.
Yeah, they moved over there several years ago. And I thought I had enough time to drop him back to his house and then get over here, but I got on 19th Street at 5 o'clock. You know, with all that construction that's going on. Took me forever.
Oh, 19th is a mess.
It is a big mess.
Went to see a doctor about 3 times in a year. Turns out I had pneumonia. So I, go back, except I knew it was all right. Yeah. So PA and RN, but never saw that.
Well, Will has never been able to work much since he was a kid. He has pulmonary things and such as that. In fact, he was advised to get on the list for a lung transplant.
Oh, that's just one of my study tools. He's exceptionally good.
Is it?
Yeah.
Any
Yeah,
little
yes.
thing gets him just really so, So. And his wife, Stephanie, she works, she's a hard worker, and she works with the custodial thing at Truckman Hospital. is a good worker. She doesn't have the education to do, much more than that. But Don and I got to know him when with the outreach and with Van Vega.
All right, 6:25 it is. Hello, testing, 1, 2, 3, good. All right, I told you that there were 6 major judge cycles. And the funny thing is they start real short and they just get longer and longer as you go further into the book. It reminds me of one time I was on a spiritual retreat type deal, and we had a group of ladies there, and I was moderating the session. So for an icebreaker, I said, why don't each of you share a story of a moment in your life that was spiritually significant where you had an encounter with the Lord that greatly blessed and changed your life? Well, there were probably something like 30 ladies there. And the first lady told her story in less than 5 minutes. And the second lady took about 7. And the next lady said, it started when I was a gleam in my parents' eyes. And my goodness, those stories got longer and long. I mean, they were seriously into this. And if we had not found a way to speak, I swear I'd still be there today. Never saw anything like it. Crazy. So the first entire cycle out of the 6 is about 7 verses long, short. Othniel. You've met this guy before. He was the guy that Caleb said, whoever takes the city of Devir, I will give my daughter in marriage. This was the guy. He's already a military hero. So chapter 3, verse 7. How does the cycle start? You guessed it. And the people of Israel did what was evil in the sight of the Lord. They forgot the Lord their God. That's another way of saying they abandoned him and served the Baals and the Asheroth. Therefore, the anger of the Lord was kindled against Israel. I told you this cycle would come up over and over and over. Not every cycle contains every one of those elements in explicit print, but they're all kind of present. And he sold them into the hand of Cushan Rishathaim. Again, if you're naming a child, please don't go here. We have lots of people with last names that are hyphenated anymore, don't we? But this guy has a monstrous name, which, by the way, you know what this name means? Literally, Cushan Rishathaim means, quote, dark, comma, doubly wicked. He was bad, really bad. That's what his name means. And he was a king in Mesopotamia. And the people.
They have 2 football jerseys to get the name on it.
Yes, indeed. And the people of Israel served Cushan Rishathaim 8 years. So for 8 years, they were being punished and plundered and afflicted because of their sins. Verse 9, when the people of Israel cried out to the Lord raised up a deliverer for the people of Israel who saved them, Othniel, the son of Kenaz, Caleb's younger brother. The word brother here in Hebrew is a fairly fluid term. It can mean various degrees of familial relationship. He was in the same clan. Beyond that, we can't be ultra precise. Now, I mentioned to you guys earlier when we were in the Judah section of chapter 1, that Caleb and Othniel and his whole clan were not even Israelites. They were probably somewhere through the people of Edom, but like Moses' in-laws, they had been assimilated into the tribe and they had become essentially members, quote unquote, of the tribe of Judah. But isn't it strange that when God chooses the first hero, the first judge to deliver Israel, he gets a foreigner? That's how desperate things were. This reminds me a little bit of the Comanche, when they would go on raids, they would take horses and they would take captives, especially women and children. I was in Lawton, Oklahoma at the Comanche National Museum a number of years ago, and I spoke to the curator, or the guy there who was the public relations guy, and he was telling me that, there's only like 500 people who are considered pure blood Comanche left. I'm one of them. He had also gone on to tell me that most Comanche are small in stature. They were a short people. Well, he himself was like 6 foot or 6'2", and he declared that he was a pure blood Comanche. And I said, excuse me for pointing this out, but you are physically atypical. You don't look like a Comanche. You're a pure blood? He said, well, we took captives, you know. So my tribe, we went to Mexico and we got this giant Mexican that we took captive, and he's in my family line. So yeah, Othniel, Caleb's brother, verse 10, the Spirit of the Lord was upon him, and he judged Israel. He went out to war, and the Lord gave Cushan Rishathaim, he gave dark, doubly wicked, into his hand, and his hand prevailed over Cushan Rishathaim. So the land had rest 40 years. And by the way, this is the other element we will see over and over again. Remember, it said that God would be good to the people as long as that judge lived, and then they would do evil again. So there is this period of rest. We will see this statement repeatedly. Then Othniel, the son of Kenaz, died. Okay, let's look at just a couple of things. Let me mention something to you. In the Hebrew text of this short cycle, there are 8 Hebrew lines above the middle of the story, and there are 8 Hebrew lines below the middle of the story. And smack in the middle is this one little phrase that says, and he saved them. It's balanced perfectly in terms of the amount of text. And ironically, in the Hebrew, you cannot tell whether the word he, the pronoun there, refers to Othniel or to the Lord. It's ambiguous. And so the irony, the beauty of the story is the writer is basically wrapping the whole story and balancing it around this central element that he saved them. And you say, well, who did? And the answer is yes. The answer is yes. The answer is God saved them through, he put on Othniel like a glove and he saved them. And by the way, putting him on like a glove is a perfect illustration because this whole story is wrapped around a particular key word, and that word is hand. The word is hand. First, verse 8, when God gets angry, he sells them into the what? The hand of this dark, doubly wicked king. This is a usage that we will find literally hundreds of times in Hebrew. In fact, if you want to do a fascinating keyword study, Exodus, not the whole book of Exodus, take the story of Moses. The story of Moses, particularly when he is called by God to return to Egypt and to go rescue his people. And trace the number of times, and you really have to have a version that's a fairly literal version because sense versions tend to obscure some of the usages of the Hebrew. The number of times that you have the word hand or the word finger in that story will blow your mind. And in almost every case, the whole story is wrapped around this key word that refers to the hand as a symbol of God's power or God's authority. Over and over and over. And there is one more element, which is the rod of God. Remember Aaron's rod? That is an extension of his hand. And the whole thing, dozens of times, over and over and over. And you know what happens every time that Moses gets ready to start a plague? He either points or he raises the rod. I have to believe that Pharaoh got to the point whenever he saw Moses or Aaron's hand even fidget, he'd go, oh, don't do that, stop. Because it's all based around the finger or the hand or the rod. In fact, when finally, remember during the early plagues, every time Moses did something, then the magicians of Pharaoh could do the same thing until they reach a point round about plague number 4 where they cannot do it. And what is their statement to Pharaoh? This is the finger of God. They had been seeing Moses' finger way too much. And they said, this is the finger of God. So in this story, we have the same imagery. The hand is a symbol of authority or power. Verse 8, He sold them into the hand of the king of Mesopotamia. But when they cry out to the Lord raises up a deliverer. The Spirit of the Lord is on him. He goes out to war, and the Lord gives the king into Othniel's hand. So Israel was given into Cushan-Rishathaim's hand, and then Cushan-Rishathaim is given into Othniel's hand. And in the very same verse, he says it again, his hand prevailed over this king. The Hebrew literally says his hand was strong upon him. He laid hands on him, folks. That's what he did. So you can see the art, the way that Hebrew is, very often there's a key word or a play on words that is a key to the story. Okay, that's the whole first cycle of Judges, the whole first judge cycle out of 6. Now we're ready for number 2. I'll tell you now, I've told you this already. The wildest stories in the entire Bible are in this book. And this is one of them. Verse 12. And Othniel died. Every time a judge dies, what do the people do? They do worse, is what they do. Remember, they're not just cycling, they're spiraling. The people of Israel again did what was evil in the sight of the Lord, and the Lord strengthened Eglon, the king of Moab, against Israel, because they had done what was evil in the sight of the Lord. Take a moment to look at this little word Eglon. It's a lot easier to say than Cushan-Rishathaim, right? Eglon is a word that basically means calf or bull. It can mean either one. But the word has a diminutive on the end, like señorita. ITA is a Spanish diminutive, or it can also be an expression of love or affection. A diminutive can also mean affection. So Eglon literally means little calf, or hey, calfie. It's going to be important to the story. He is a king of Moab, which means he's from a people that live on the border to the southeast of Israel, and they are related by the family of Lot to the Israelites. They are a kin people, even though they're enemies at this point. So he gathered to himself the Ammonites and the Amalekites and went and defeated Israel, and they took possession of the city of palms. You would know this city by the name Jericho. What was the first city that Israel took when they crossed the Jordan? Jericho. And now they've lost it. And the people of Israel served Eglon, the king of Moab, 18 years. First cycle, 8 years of punishment. Second cycle, 18 years of punishment. Verse 15, then the people of Israel cried out to the Lord, and the Lord raised up for them a deliverer, Ehud, the son of Gera, the Benjaminite, a left-handed man. Oh, here's the word hand again. What do you know? Okay, let's unpack this for a minute. In both of these cycles, it says, after they got into trouble, they cried out to the Lord. Does it say they repented? Yet when you hear the story of Judges, you hear over and over it taught that, when things got bad, they repented and turned back to God. All it says is that they cried out to the Lord. It does not say they repented. Was it a cry of repentance? Maybe. Was it simply a cry of groaning or distress? Maybe. It's kind of vague, but it doesn't really say that God rescued them because they repented. It says he rescued them because his heart hurt for them. It was his compassion, not their righteousness. So God raises up a deliverer. From what tribe? Benjamin. Now, Othniel, the first judge, was from what tribe? Judah. In the story of the tribes in chapter 1 with their military defeat, where did we start? Judah. First judge? Judah. Who was the second tribe in that list of military defeats? Benjamin. Second judge? Well, what do you know? Benjamin. Curious, huh? Arsenio Hall, in his talk show years ago, used to have a section he called Things That Make You Go, Things that make you go, By the way, do you all know what the word Benjamin means? Benjamin was the son of Rachel. She died giving birth to him. She named him Benoni, which means son of my sorrow. But Jacob renamed him Benjamin, which means son of the right hand. Son of the right hand. And so in total irony, the author of the book of Judges delights in going out of his way every time Benjamin is mentioned to point out that the Benjaminite under concern is left-handed. Nearly every time. Because it's ironic. And it will be an important part of the story. So the people of Israel sent tribute by him to Eglon, the king of Moab. When you're the subject people, you've been conquered, then you got to pay the big guy. So Eglon is the king. He's Kathy or little calf, right? Ehud, the judge who's being raised up by God, is the one who's bringing the gift to him. And Ehud, verse 16, made for himself a sword with two edges, a cubit in length. This is actually a poor translation. The word here is not the normal word for cubit. In fact, the word here is never, ever used again in Scripture. It is a very unusual word, and a cubit was about 18 inches in length. That would be way too long for what the story requires here, because Ehud is going to take his dagger, his sword that he made, and he's going to strap it to the inside of his thigh, so it will be hidden. You don't want a long sword strapped to the inside of your thigh. Bad things can happen. Probably it was a foot or less in length, and he bound it on his right thigh under his clothes. And he presented the tribute to Eglon, the king of Moab. Now, Eglon was a very fat man. Little calf was obese to the point of scary. So to speak, little calf was a giant of a man. And when Ehud had finished presenting the tribute, he sent away the people who carried the tribute. But he himself turned back at the idols near Gilgal. The word idols here is also a very unusual word, and we're not sure that it meant necessarily idols. It could have meant boundary stones. It might have meant stone figurines. It's a difficult word. But it's like he brings the tribute, and the tribute is brought on the shoulders of all these porters. You know, these guys are carrying it. Then he sends them away, and he himself goes away a little distance, and then he turns back at that point where these stone idols are and returns to speak to the king. And he said, I have a secret message for you, O king. And the king commanded silence, and all his attendants went out from his presence. And Ehud came to him as he was sitting alone in his cool roof chamber. And Ehud said, I have a message from God for you. And the king arose from his seat. Okay. A couple of things we need to be aware of in order for us to understand what's going on here. Ehud fashions a specialty item, a specialty sword. It's not the normal length. It's made for concealing, and it is two-edged, which was probably also unusual for the time. This is the first of many very, very strange weapons that we're going to encounter in the book of Judges. So put a little mark in your mind, weird weapons. This is the first one. You're going to get many more before we're done. The word tribute, in other words, the tax or the penalty that the Israelites had to give to the Moabites, to the king, this is a word that usually means an offering in a sacrifice, like when you make your offering of your bull or your goat. So we have a king whose name means little calf, We have an offering, a word that is usually used in sacrifice, and we have a sword. I have a message from God for you. And the king arose from his seat, and Ehud reached with his left hand, took the sword from his right thigh, and thrust it into the king's belly. You see, there weren't many left-handed people, especially Benjamin, right hand, son of the right hand, right? So the king's security usually looked for a sword to be strapped on the other hip. That's how Ehud could fool them. Also, the fact that the sword was shorter than usual and it was concealed. And so when the king stands up to receive the message from the deity, Ehud reaches with his left hand and the king is completely fooled. He doesn't sense any danger because normally that's not where danger would come from. And he takes the sword and thrusts it into the king's belly. Now imagine an enormously obese individual. Surely you've been to all-you-can-eat places and you've seen these individuals who have been there before many times, right? You can see this foot-long hilt and blade making the indentation. It's double-edged, and so it goes in smooth. Rips him right open, filleted like a fish. And it keeps on going straight in. And as it depresses into the belly, the fat molds over and the sword literally disappears. I mean, if you wanted it back, it wasn't going to happen. It keeps going, and even the hilt apparently enters through the channel that's been cut. And it says the fat closed over the blade, for he did not pull the sword out of his belly. And then the final indignity is that his anal sphincter gives way and he soils himself. The dung came out. This is not the way you want to die, folks. This is not dignified in any way. This reminds me a little bit. I once did some research on the death of Elvis Presley. Did you know he died on the pot? He literally died on the toilet in Graceland. And it is quite possible some of the medications he were taking had the side effect of creating constipation. That's not unusual for medications to do. And very possibly the cardiac event or the stroke that took Elvis's life was the result of excessive straining on the pot when he was already, over medicated and his system was already stressed out. Not the way you want to go, just not. This is the way Eglon went. And the irony is, you know what the writer is telling us here? Eglon is the sacrifice. He's the little calf, way, way overgrown. The tribute is the offering. All the words around this are words indicating a sacrifice. And Eglon is it. Then Ehud went onto the porch and closed the doors of the roof chamber behind him and locked them. And when he had gone, the servants came. And when they saw that the doors of the roof chamber were locked, they thought, surely the king is relieving himself. After all, they could smell the foul odor when a man that large empties his bowels. The smell is terrific. Oh, well, he's busy. And the very fact that the king defecated in his death gave Ehud the opportunity and the time to make his escape. The servants waited till they were embarrassed. And when he still did not open the doors, they took the key and opened them, and there lay their lord dead on the floor. Ehud escaped while they delayed, and he passed beyond the idols and escaped to Sierra. I'm going to stop right there because we are about 1 minute from closing time, and I want to honor and respect, at least every once in a while, y'all's time. Any final thoughts or questions before we close?
This is just fascinating. I don't think I would have been able to decipher all of this. So you have to have some kind of scholar to get all the words surrounding to come up with what exactly is happening here. I wouldn't have never seen him as being a sacrifice. So I appreciate this. It's just fascinating to me. There's so much in it that I definitely would have to go through it again through the YouTube. So thank you so much.
Well, thank you. It's been a pleasure and an entertainment to go through the stories. Like I said, this is a terrible book. It is a sad, sad story, but it is also incredibly fascinating and put together with tremendous literary art. And we'll be observing that as we go. I pray that you all have a wonderful week. And for those of you who have asked questions about homework and testing, I promise I will visit with Kirk and I'll try to get back to you on that. Nobody is required to take this for credit. None of you is required to do any assignments. But if some of you wish to, I will try to make something available. God bless, and we will see you next time.
Thank you.